Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andrew Delios. I'm a professor at NUS Business School in the Department of Strategy and Policy, and I am the Vice Dean of MSc programs at NUS. Today, in our continuing series of live streams on how the COVID situation is affecting the world around us, I'm going to speak to issues related to expectations about the changes we can expect in our post-COVID-19 world. Almost anywhere we look around us, we can read and see forecasts of the changes we can expect to see in the world around us after the COVID-19 crisis leaves its imprint on the world. These changes include, first, a strong shift from in-person face-to-face education to an increased prevalence of online education. Second, a shift from working at your office to work at home. Third, a change in our world of international business in terms of flows of trade and foreign direct investment. And fourth, changes in fundamental aspects of the societies in which we live. Clearly, each of these four issues could merit a long discussion alone. I will link the discussion of these four by connecting the four issues to two key factors. The first factor I will consider is, what are our assumptions about human values, behaviors, and priorities? And second, what level of agency do we have, or more important, will we assume in the post-COVID-19 world? We must consider these two factors when thinking about what could happen along these four issues of change that I have identified. I mention these two factors because much of what we see in terms of projections of the future connect to pressures from COVID-19 and the changes we have had to make to comply with lockdowns. We can readily overlook the point that post-crisis, the same drivers that made the world what it was pre-crisis will make the world what it is post-crisis. Again, these drivers are our two factors, basically. What do people want and what are people willing to do? If we don't think about these factors, we will never, ever be able to accurately think about what our world will be like post-COVID. For the first factor, what do people want? We need to think individually about our own assumptions about what drives human behavior. A famous Nobel laureate, Oliver Williamson, recently passed away. He was awarded the Nobel Prize for his research on organizations. Oliver Williamson developed ideas about how we structure economic activity within and across organizations based upon the nature of the exchange and certain assumptions about human behavior. His core assumption about human behavior is that people are self-interested seeking and that people will behave with guile. This doesn't mean that people are dishonest. It simply means that people generally do what is best for them, and they will be clever in how they arrange situations to make the best for themselves. This assumption about human behavior does not mean that people are evil or not generous or that they are unethical. It simply means that they are careful to watch out for number one. So let's make this as our first assumption. People are self-interested and they will behave in ways that protect their self-interest. The second assumption is one that most people will accept easily, namely that people do not like uncertainty. Much of what we do in life is related to narrowing the uncertainty in our life and to creating some semblance of control in our lives. We can never, ever reduce uncertainty to zero, but we can, for example, find work that provides security, or we can find social circles that are stable, or we can save money or take insurance or put our trust in a countrywide social support network to reduce uncertainties in our life that come from the unpredictable nature of what happens around us. The third assumption, and again, I do not think this is a controversial one, is that people value social structure as provided by family, organizations, and concepts of nation. The value of these three, family, organizations, and nation, can vary by culture, but all are important. Nobody, or almost nobody, wants to be stranded alone on a desert island. The fourth assumption concerns how people view information. Information has its greatest prominence and effect when it is immediate and it is new. As information recedes into the past, and as information becomes more commonplace, the influence of this information on people's behavior becomes less and less pronounced. Those are the four assumptions. Now let's think about how these four assumptions connect to the first two issues that I want to discuss: the shift to online education and the shift to home-based work versus working from the office. The predictions about long-term outcomes for both education and office life are that both will see a migration to remote interactions. Many, many people across all media have said we are now entering our remote world. So much of the media today has headlines that say we will have more online learning, we will have more online transactions, we will have more online work. An example is from the Globe and Mail, Canada's national newspaper. The headline read, "Is the office era over?" The surprising truth about working from home. The immediate effect of COVID-19 and the distancing and isolation was to make people realize, yeah, hey, I can work from home. Or learning from home is easy. I can do what I want and when I want and still have the same outcome. Why do I need an expensive in-person education when I can learn remotely from home? The supposed benefits of home-based work and learning connects to the point that people value independence and freedom of choice. Breaking the 16 hours of the day and the 7 days of the week into many small bits of work and study instead of 5 large chunks of work spread over 5 days, spent at an office or spent at a school, has some appeal. Simply because we don't have to wake up, get ready, and hurry to go to work or school. Given the immediacy of this information and its novelty, the effect on people's mindsets and beliefs has been that this can be the new norm, that the world will become a much better place where we are not physically tied to where we learn or where we earn. Yet, as fears of COVID-19 recede, as the novelty of the crisis becomes less, for example, how many of us no longer check COVID-19 stats on an hourly or daily basis, its effect becomes increasingly distanced in our rearview mirrors. We will bounce back to the same drivers of our behavior that existed pre-crisis. More so than creating a new desire for online learning and massive online open education, our experience with COVID-19 reinforces the benefits of face-to-face learning. Not only is in-person interaction more satisfying from the perspective of being able to engage in higher order learning, it also creates a chance to develop the social structure that can be such a lifelong benefit of tertiary education. That is our third assumption. Instead of creating a new wave for online education, the crisis has led people to understand better what is lost when not engaging in face-to-face learning, which only reinforces a differentiation between remote and face-to-face learning. Learning is the easy one. Office life is a more difficult one. Students tend to have less complicated lives than working adults, where work-life balance and the ability to have discretion about when to go to the office is important. Many people have reflected on the benefits of being at home and feeling less stress because of more time to attend to home matters and less stress from not having to travel and spend blocks of time away from partners, parents, and children. Yet, when we think about our assumptions of human behavior, we know that such a situation is not sustainable over time. In time, the cautions and changes in our daily routines will bounce back to what they were pre-crisis, as the news and influence of the crisis recedes and no longer captures our attention. The social structure and connections created by the many societies that are so important in our daily life will retake their place of prominence in our values. Work provides much more than an income. It provides a social structure, a tribe, if you like, that is the intermediary in our societies between family and nation. Work also provides certainty in our life. And this is where the danger rises if indeed we switch to a mostly remote working world. One of the big changes in our economies prior to COVID-19 was the emergence of the digital economy. A companion to the digital economy has been what we can call the gig economy. Alongside this, we have also seen the emergence of outsourcing as a prominent company strategy to reduce costs and increase flexibility. My question to you is, what happens when the leaders of our for-profit organizations see the new work-at-home trend as a way to outsource employment, not let employees work at home, but instead outsource employment and consequently gig many more employees who were previously non-giggable? Remember our first assumption. People are self-interest seeking with guile. Leaders in our organizations are heavily compelled by shareholder primacy to take decisions that increase the bottom line of the firm. Our leaders are compelled by their self-interests and by the incentive structures in organizations to make those difficult decisions that maximize margins and increase the bottom line. What happens when leaders see that people can work from home? Why would they need these people to be part of the organization? Why not gig these people, giving them short-term contracts or project-based contracts and save their company dollars? Why create an expensive organizational commitment to a person when you can go to the market whenever you need that person's skills and expertise? If working from the office is no longer a concept, then by the very nature of organizational management, working as a long-term employee becomes less and less a reality. This trend, if it ever happened, and it could happen, and it might happen, would increase the social stratification we see in developed and developing economies today, with the rich becoming richer and everyone else, at best, having steady income levels. Moreover, for the employed who become gigged, what happens to them? Their incomes become more uncertain, which certainly is not a good outcome, as we remember our second assumption that people do not like uncertainty. Imagine a world where, yes, we can work at home all the time, but we do not have work all the time. More so than the stress created by having to manage to work-life balance in the present day, we will have more stress from trying to create financial balance from a life with unpredictable income streams. With the loss of a working place and a so-called loss of career in an organization comes also the loss of opportunities to have that important social structure that work provides. Too often lost in our discussions of work is simply the stability and structure of an office, a factory, or a school. Sure, we want our careers, incomes, and education, but we also want to have people around us, friends, frenemies, and colleagues. All are important to us. And in today's world, so much of what comes from where we work and study is in those social relationships. The loss is profound when we no longer have that connection to the rest of the people in our society. If I am to summarize what I've said until now, it is be careful what you wish for. Be careful for wishing for a totally remote world. Certainly our pre-COVID world had stresses and challenges, but forecasting a world in which central elements of our society are lost is forecasting a world that, at least to me, runs counter to many of the key values that we hold dearly as individuals in society. Now, my next topic was to talk about international trade and investment, but I'll save that topic for another day. And in the remaining minutes I have left, let me transition to the fourth point, which is the agency issue as it connects to what kind of society do we want to have in our post-COVID world? And then I'll turn to the questions that have arisen. My observation of how we talk about the short and long-term changes in the post-COVID world is that all talk seems to be predicated on the basis of exogeneity. It is exogenous in the sense that someone, somewhere, will mysteriously do something that leads to the changes in the world that we will see or want to see. My point, and is a very simple one, is that this change should not be exogenous. It should be endogenous. Each person has some level of agency and responsibility in what the world will look like post-COVID, or even independent of COVID at any point in our lives. Through the choices we make daily and through the deliberate actions we take in our lives, we have agency to shape the world in millions of minuscule ways, but the sum of which is anything but minuscule. Agency is important. Our choices are important. And most importantly is our recognition of our responsibilities of leaders in our classrooms, in our peer groups, in our community groups, and in our organizations. We have a responsibility as leaders in any grouping of people to shape the world as it should be. Too much of the time, we subvert our agency to a bland acceptance of the status quo, under the idea that one person cannot change anything, or too much of the time we believe our desired change will occur magically and exogenously, but it won't. The reality is that choices reside with you and that you have more agency than you realize. As we move forward in our post-COVID-19 world and start to think about what are the critical points about how we would like our society to be, for example, do we need universal incomes? How important is government-supported healthcare? How important is it to reduce income gaps? How important is it to become blind to differences and be fully open to inclusion? All of these issues come to mind because these issues have been exposed by crisis as weaknesses in each of our nation states. Hopefully, an increased awareness of the magnitude of these problems created by crisis, alongside an increased acceptance of our individual responsibilities and agency, will allow us to make the changes our societies fundamentally require. To me, that is a big question around COVID-19. It is about what we can do. It is about what we envision our world to be, and is about fully accepting our responsibilities to shape that world instead of accepting the world as it has been shaped for us. Now, I've noticed a few questions, and I'd like to turn to these questions. And one question is, what would you say is the most dangerous change to societies post-COVID-19? I would say the most dangerous change is the elimination of the small groupings, in other words, organizations, as a fundamental axis around which our life revolves. As I mentioned, people need the certainty that organizations provide to them, and people need the social structure that organizations provide to them. If we reside or rely too heavily on virtual communications and the idea that we can all be separate from organizations, then we will create a world that is much less happy for all of us and much less satisfying. That would be my response to that question. Second question is, there is something Darwinian about what you described earlier, which I'm not too sure what it is. Do you think this pandemic will also see the survival of the fittest in individuals in society, and at what cost to society? I think this relates to the final points that I was making about what kind of societies do we want to structure? What we have seen the COVID crisis reveal is that the weak will always be exposed in such situations. Those of us who are lucky enough to have stable jobs, those of us who are lucky enough to have the resources to provide for their health care, those of us who are lucky enough to live in nations that have munificent health care and are well-resourced, very much like Singapore, makes COVID-19 more an inconvenience than a crisis. And that's not to downplay what's happening, but compared to how people suffer in Brazil and potentially in India and certainly in Iraq, we see that without overcoming some of these gaps between what the haves and the have-nots, then we emerge with, yes, it's a survival. It's not of the fittest, but it's the most lucky and the wealthiest. The cost to society is instability. And the cost to society to counter that instability is more authoritarianism, in my opinion, more authoritarianism to combat that kind of uncertainty. Next question, how will education look like post-COVID? How do mindsets need to change? I'm not sure we need to change mindsets, but what we have to do is recognize the benefits of various forms of education. And what I see is a greater stratification between the online and the face-to-face world, which means that the difference one pays and the difference one has in expectations of learning face-to-face versus online education will become more pronounced. No longer will I think we see universities try to blur the distinction between the two of them, because the fundamental reaction from both educators and the educating is that if you signed up for face-to-face, you don't want online. Maybe a little bit in terms of a flipped classroom, but the reality is that the differentiation will be reinforced. Who will be the final judge if we have achieved these goals of changes? There never is a final judge, because we don't even know what we're doing, and we don't know by which metrics to judge anything. We just hope we live in a slightly better world. So what kind of metrics can we look at? We can look at things of whether people are more satisfied. If we see indexes relating to people's satisfaction or happiness in life increase, then we can think we've made some good changes. But these changes are very difficult to gauge, so I'm a bit uncertain on that one. Smaller countries need to band together. What are the collaboration aspects? That's kind of an interesting point, in the sense that it suggests that the world will be driven by the dominance of larger countries, which has always been the case. Certainly we lived in a multipolar world, in many ways driven by comparisons between the US and its allies and its adversaries and its rivals, whether that was Russia or China or the European Union. And certainly within the small countries, there's an opportunity to band together. I think we can take this as an idea that maybe within the ASEAN, we can finally see the 10 nations come together, and maybe they can start to form the kind of strength of an economic entity that they should be. So instead of each country being pressured by the US and China to take a side or to favor one or another as a trading partner, or to be disadvantaged in their negotiations, that the ASEAN can come together as a force of 600 million people with tremendous growth opportunities and favorable demographics overall, then yeah, I think there could be more power. But that's kind of a slightly different change. Then also we get to the idea, I know I just see indication that we're past 1:20, so let me just go to a couple more questions quickly. Should we tax the rich more to support the weaker ones? I don't know if it's a matter of taxing the rich more, or maybe just changing our distribution policies. And this will vary country by country. But certainly in the US, when you look at every indicator of taxation, the rich have become much less taxed. The very simple number is prior to World War II, rich were taxed around the level of 60 to 70%. These days, the very rich are taxed at the same levels as the rich and the modestly incomed. Clearly, at least to me, who grew up in a moderately socialist country of Canada, there's something wrong with that. I don't like paying tax, and I certainly don't like paying tax when the taxes are misused, but if the taxes provide some kind of benefit, that's terrific. Oh, okay. Not usually highlighted is the loss of very meaningful quick chats or interactions with people in the office. Yes, I agree fully about that. And this is exactly what we mean for the social interaction. We can gain so much, not only socially, but also intellectually, from trading ideas and having some kind of serendipitous chat with a colleague. Certainly that's what happens in the university when I'm talking about research or teaching. Maybe I'll mention some teaching issue I'm having, and a colleague will quickly give me an idea about what they've done, and that'll spark something that I can be able to create. So certainly it facilitates the sharing of innovation and ideas. How can we make university education more relevant in the dynamic changes we are going through? Yes, this is a very important question, and one that is always important, and one that I've increasingly become engaged with and believe is a real issue. At one level, I guess we have two broad issues related to university education. Number one is just cultivating ways to think and ways to express oneself, and providing various kinds of foundational pieces of knowledge, whether that is esoteric or whether it is practical knowledge. Then the second thing is actually making people able to transition more effectively to a working life, which is again, making education more relevant. This is where it's very important in a business school to make sure that we fulfill that function. Now, we're not a training school, such as a college where we educate people on how to do accounting, but at the same time, we can't leave people misplaced from the workplace. So how can we make education more relevant in the dynamic changes we are going through? The simplest way is to keep in touch with people who are the buyers of our product. In other words, people who will subsequently take our students into their organizations and fully understand what kind of skills and knowledge, values, and ethics they value in those individuals. And to the extent we can mold that in some way in our students in the university, then we will be more relevant. Finally, last question. There's both an immediate short-term strategy and a longer-term one. Governments have spent much and is expected to recoup that through tougher fiscal policies. How will senior leaders balance this government expectation vis-a-vis their obligations to shareholders? This is a really great question, and it's probably something my colleagues in finance are more capable to answer, as well as our macroeconomists. But I think that the very relevant point is the money that's coming out to support all the economies, whether it's the trillions of dollars in the US or the billions of dollars in Singapore, comes from either retained earnings in the case of Singapore or from future tax revenues in the case of the US. But the point is that yes, there is a cost, and this is going to be borne by the future taxpayers. In a sense, we're lending to ourselves. And yeah, this is a very important issue to cover. And I hope future topics or future discussions within this series will address this. And speaking of future talks in this series, we have Associate Professor Chen Wenlan, who's going to discuss the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on consumer spending. I can maybe preempt her and say that if we follow the previous question, which says that we've already wasted all our money, then the impact on consumer spending will be that no money to spend. So maybe that'll just be a very, very short discussion. But of course, I'm being facetious. At this point in time, I'd like to thank everybody for taking the time to listen. Hopefully, there's been some value in this discussion. I know it's been interesting for me to be able to organize my thoughts around this issue, and I certainly welcome the opportunity to answer some of the questions that arose during this discussion. Thank you very much.